What's up, guys? Cal from Action Backers here. Hopefully you're having a fantastic week. So earlier in the week, I took to Twitter and asked you guys what you wanted to see for my next video. The winner was power ratings. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you a step-by-step tutorial how to build your own power ratings. I'm going to show you how I've incorporated it into my NHL model. But don't worry, if you don't bet hockey, this works for NBA, NFL, and MLB as well. Really any sport you want to use, as long as you have a few simple statistics, I'll show you exactly how to do it. So before we hop over to the computer and get started, if you can just take a minute, click the subscribe button and the bell so you get notified whenever I release new content. I really appreciate it. And lastly, be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you find the content useful. All right, without further ado, let's hop over to the computer and get started on building our own power ratings. Okay, so let's get into creating some power ratings. When all is said and done, you're going to have something that looks like this. So what you're looking at here is my NHL power ratings, but you can see here there's also NFL and NBA. So I'll show you, and it works across sports. Shout out to Clear Data Sports. They're the ones who actually taught me how to do this, watching a video of theirs a couple years ago, and I've just applied it and modified it to a few different sports. So before we actually get into building this, it's important to note there's a difference between power ratings and power rankings. So I'm sure you've heard of this before, but essentially the power rating is actually the numerical advantage that one team has over another. So you can see here in the example, Detroit has -1, call it -1 for simplicity's sake, whereas Tampa Bay is plus 0.4. So this essentially means that Tampa Bay, if they were to play Detroit, then Tampa Bay would have an edge of 1.4 goals, essentially. So that's what that's saying. And then the power ranking is just ranking the teams. So in the NHL, there are 31 teams, so it's ranking them from 1 to 31 based on their ratings. Okay? So small, minor detail there, but the two terms, they get tossed around, but ultimately I'm going to show you how to build the ratings, and then you can easily apply that to the rankings. Now, there are lots of ways that you can build power ratings. The way that I'm going to show you is really simplistic, but it's fairly accurate. And we're just going to use past scores to predict the outcome of the future games. So we're going to have the data readily available to us, which makes it really easy. And then we're going to use a powerful tool, which is free, which is great. So I'm showing you this in Google Sheets because Google Sheets is free and everything we're going to use is free. So you don't have to worry about buying Excel or anything like that. Similar concepts apply in Excel. If you want to use Excel, you can follow along too, though. So to begin with, the easiest thing to do is, and I'm just going to copy over some of the stuff just for the simplicity of time, but all you would want to do is start a new spreadsheet. So you can just do sheet.new. If you didn't know that, there's an easy trick for you, and that will start a new spreadsheet. So let's just call this Power Ratings Demo. And if you stick around until the end, I'm going to show you a couple cool different things you can do with the power ratings as well. So I'm not just going to show you how to build them, but actually how to apply them to your betting a little bit too. So make sure you're sticking around until the end because I'll show you that. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is create a second sheet. For simplicity's sake, we're going to want two sheets. So if you just label it Power Ratings, and then your other sheet, you can name it really whatever you want, but I just like to call it Year-to-Date Scores. And this is just going to save you some time in the long run. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to head over to my NHL model. I'm going to work off my NHL model because it's integrated with my actual model. So I'll be able to show you sort of how the power ratings work with the model as well. But you can see that the NFL ones and the NBA ones, it's all the same, sort of the same thing. So it applies across the board. But just for the simplicity of time, I'm just going to copy this top bit here, mainly just the headers. Okay, so then we have that, and I'm just going to delete any formulas in here. So we're starting fresh and just make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, we're good. The next thing we're going to want to do is pull in our stats. So the easiest way to do this is to use either Hockey Reference or Pro Football Reference or Basketball Reference. They're all the same, but they depending on the sport. So you can see here, I have it here for Hockey Reference. And all this is doing, if I just copy this, I'll actually go to the website and show you. This is the NHL 2019-2020 schedule and results. So you can see all of the regular season games so far. And this updates once a day with the results and the schedule. So all we're going to do is copy that URL. So Command or Control C, and then go back into our power ratings. So all you're going to want to do is come to your year-to-date scores, and you're just going to say, and let me pull down my formula bar so you can see it. You just want to say equals import HTML bracket, and then to enter in the actual URL, you're just going to do quote, and then copy in the URL, comma, quote table. And if you're not familiar with this, if you just follow along with what I'm saying, once you have it, you'll be able to apply it to anything you want. So don't worry about, if you're not good with formulas and stuff like that. As long as you copy it exactly how I have it, you can switch out the URL to whatever you need and it will work. Okay, so you can follow along. So we're entering in our query here. So then we're just going to close that quotes and then another comma, and we're just going to hit 0. And that's because we're not going to index based on different tables on the site. It's not really something you need to worry about. And then we're just going to close that. So now when we hit enter, what this is going to do, it's going to pull in all of the games and all of the scores from this website. So you can see here, going back all the way to the first game, first night of the season in October, it has the scores. It also has some stuff that we don't need. It has the attendance, the length of the game, and then notes. But the reason we're doing this on a separate page is because this is a live URL. So if we try and edit this, so for instance, if I go back to this game in the Minnesota Wild, if I try and change the score to, let's say 6 and hit enter, it's not going to let me. What that's going to do now is if we scroll up, it's going to give us a reference error and say that there's something in the way, essentially, because it would overwrite the data in that cell. So it's not going to let us do anything because it's live. So now we're just going to go back and we're going to delete this. And as soon as we delete this, it's going to pull in that info. Okay, so it's live info. So for the scores and everything and for what we need, it's here really easily. So we're not having to manually copy and paste, but you're not going to do your editing directly on this tab. So that's where we're going to use our power ratings tab. So to start with, all we need to do, and let's just hide these 3 for now because these 3, because you don't actually need them this second. So just so they're not being confused. So then all we're going to do is we want the date, we want the visiting team, the visiting goals, the home, and the home goals. And then if you want to, whether or not it went to overtime or shootout, that's up to you. That's for reference. It's not going to affect the power ratings at all. But if you're curious as to which games went to overtime or shootout, then you can leave L. Otherwise, you can get rid of it. So date, visitor goals, home goals. So if we come back to the scores page, you can see we have date, visitor goals, home goals, and then this is OT or shootout. So all we're going to want to do is scroll across, and I'm going to take in the overtime and shootout. And then on a Mac, if you just press Command Shift down, that will bring it down to the very bottom. And I think on a PC, it's Control Shift down. But either way, you just want to highlight all of these, and then we're just going to copy, so Command or Control C, and we're going to bring this back to our Power Ratings tab. So we're going to start with date. Now, it's really important here, what you're going to want to do, if you just paste this, you just want to make sure that all of the cells are aligned up correctly, which it looks like it is, right? So we have the date, we have the visiting team, the visiting goals, home team, home goals. So we're good. So we just we saved ourselves a whole lot of time by pulling that in all together. And you can see we have all the games for the season, and this is where it's going to get cool because we'll be able to start predicting future outcomes based on the past results. But we'll get there in a few minutes. So now we're just going to go up, and I'm just going to format this a little bit. So I'm just going to click the side just because I like to see the teams. And there you go. So now we can easily see all of the outcomes. So progress. Next thing we need to do is we're going to want to have a listing of all of the teams. So the easiest way to do that is because all of the teams at this point, they have played at least one game. We can just go into the R section or wherever, it doesn't really matter. And if we just say equals unique, this formula, and then bracket, and we can either use the home or the away, it really doesn't matter. So let's just use the visitor. So we can say H:, H, and that's just going to take everything unique in that range and it's going to spit it out. So you can see it's got visitor, and then it's got all, if we do a count at the bottom, all 31 teams. So we're good. So all we want to do here then is we're going to highlight all 31 teams, copy this, and then this is really important. We're going to go over to team. We're not just going to paste it though, because if we paste it, it's not going to let us delete this later because it's actually pulling from a different spot. So we're just going to come over to team. We're going to click, and under paste special, we're going to paste values only. And the shortcut for this is just Command Shift V or Control Shift V. But we're going to paste values only. And so easy as that. Now we have all 31 teams, so we can go ahead and we can get rid of this. So we're good to go there. So now we have all of our teams in here. So we're off to a good start. So the next thing we need to do is we want to calculate the home margin. So to do that, this is, again, it's just, and let me copy my formula over from my other model, but it's a really simple formula. So it's literally, we're just going to be taking the home goals minus the visitor goals, because ultimately we're calculating for the home outcome in this version of doing this. So if we just paste that in, and again, you can see, so if we click on the formula, it's K6, which is home goals, so the Oilers, minus I6, the visitor goals, okay? And if you click on the square, that will copy that formula all the way down for the margins. So now you have it. So that's the first step there. Now, before we do the forecast, there's a few things we need to do, okay? So we need to just set some arbitrary ratings for these teams. And once we use the solver, it's going to update automatically. So first of all, let's set an arbitrary number for the home edge. Let's say we're going to guess that the home edge on average is 1 goal. So we're just going to put 1 goal. And if it was football, then conventional wisdom would say that the home edge is something like 2.5 or 3, typically. So we're going to take a home edge of 1. And then we need to give these teams some ratings to start with. So I'm just going to start with 15 and work my way down. Oops. 13, 12, 11. And once you've got a couple of them, if you just highlight all of this and then click the corner and drag it down, it will take them down. So you can see we got between 15 and negative 15 with 0 in the middle. And then all we need to do, we need the mean. So if we just say equals average of, what is that, B6 to B36, you can see that gives us a mean of exactly 0, and that's just the average, which makes sense. But it's worth noting this number, and eventually this number, and let me just highlight these text, change this text to something like blue, and let me bold them. These are automatically going to be changing with the solver, okay? So we don't need to worry about that yet. But you'll see that when we start running the solver, it's going to update this. And these ratings will make more sense as we go. So now we need to look at forecast. And the forecast is essentially, it's going to be taking let me just grab the formula quickly. So the formula might look confusing to start with, but it actually makes some sense once you do it. Let me do this fresh. So we're just going to say equals home edge, and again, we're going to lock this in, plus VLOOKUP, and we want the home team, so we're going to click on the home team, J7, and we can lock in J if we want to. Don't lock in the 7 in this case, though, because we want it to copy to the rest. The range that we're going to look at is this range here, because we want to get their rating, okay? So let's lock that in, and in this case we can lock both in because we want it to be that same range of the 31 teams at all times. Index, so this just means of this range, which column are we looking at, and we want to look at the rating, so that's 2. So team would be 1, rating would be 2, so we're just going to say 2, and then false. Okay, so far we have the home edge plus whatever the home team's rating is. So you can see St. Louis right now their rating is -8, and this is going to change. So -8 plus 1, the home edge, is -7. So that's correct. And then we're just going to subtract VLOOKUP again, because now we need to get the road team's rating. So minus VLOOKUP, in this case, Washington. And again, I'm going to lock in the column, but not the individual team. So we're just going to put the $ on H, not on H and 7, comma, and then same range. So we want A6 to B36, A6, and you can see I'm locking this in again because we want it to be the same range, to B36. These $, when you're copying a lot of formulas down and across, they're incredibly important. They're easy to miss sometimes, but if, for instance, you didn't have the $, to lock in the formula for the home edge, so on the G and the 3, it wouldn't work. Everything would break because it would start pulling down everything from the G column. So it would pull in different dates and stuff, and everything would be crazy. So that's just a pro tip. Make sure when you need to lock something in that you're double checking that you have $ around it. If you only want to lock in a column, then you're only putting it in front of the, in this case, H. If you want to lock in the column and the cell specifically, then make sure you're putting it in the column and the row number. Okay, so again, that's the range, and then we want Washington's rating. So we would take, again, we do comma 2, and then again false. And you don't need to worry about false. It's always going to be false, and that's going to ensure that you pull the right team through. So if we hit enter, it's going to give us a weird number, -21, and this is going to change. But just to make sure we did it right, so you can see from our sample, it's the exact same. And actually, I'm just going to move the zeros just so it's easier to see. But to triple check this, all we would need to do is if we just do equals home edge, which we have 1, plus St. Louis Blues, so we find them in here, so plus -8, and then we can put this whole thing in brackets, and then minus whatever Washington's edge is, so in this case, 14, it gives us -21, which is the exact same, so we know we did it right. So now we're just going to copy this all the way down, and now we have our forecast. So again, these numbers look way out of whack because we haven't run the solver or anything like this, but essentially this is just pulling in the home team's rating, subtracting it from the away team's rating. And the reason they look out of whack is because I've just given them arbitrary numbers, right? We know Colorado is not the worst team in the league. But for this, the ratings are saying that they are for now, okay? And then the next thing we need to do is just add in a squared error. And this is just going to take the difference between the margin and the forecast. So again, I'll just go over and I'll copy it just for simplicity's sake. But all this is, if we click on the formula, you can see. So this is just taking so our home margin minus the forecast and then squared. So to get the squared, it's just shift and then the up arrow, which is above the 6 on the keyboard, and then 2 for squared. Okay, so that's our squared error. And same thing, we're just going to copy this all the way down. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to add in the squared sum, okay? So that's a big number, and it's literally just taking the sum of everything in this squared error, and it's adding it up. And the reason we want this, and again, this is going to be something that we can set to blue. This is going to automatically change as well. The reason we want this is our goal here, when we run the solver, is it's going to want to make this number as small as possible. And by doing that, it's going to spit out the most accurate home edge and the most accurate ratings. Okay, so that's it. That's the formula. So now how do we make this work? Well, all we need to do is come to add-ons, and I already have it here. It's called Solver. But if you don't have it, you would just click on Get Add-ons, search apps, and all you're looking for, if you just type in Solver, it's this one here, Solver Optimization for Google Sheets. I know it only has a 2-star rating. Sometimes it can be kind of a pain and quit on you for no reason, but it's free and it works really, really well. So this is all you want, okay? So you're going to click this and install it. And once you've done that, you're going to come up to add-ons, click on Solver, and click on Start. And from here, we're going to need to enter in a bunch of parameters. So the first thing, we want to set our objective. So our objective is going to be this, this sum of squared here. So if we click on the cell and we click our set objective, so 04, and I'm just going to lock this in. You don't have to lock it in, but I like to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. And then, like I said, we want this to be as small a number as possible. So we're going to say to min, so to the minimum. And then how are we going to get that? So we're going to do that by changing. What are we going to change? So we're going to change the ratings, B6 to B36, comma. We're also going to be changing the home edge, which is G3. So does that make sense? So in order to get this to be the minimum number possible, we're going to be changing our ratings and our home edge to make this as small as possible. Now, the only other thing we need to do is we need to make sure, subject to, so we're going to click add, and the constraint is, so we always want to make sure that B3, which is our mean, our average, that equals 0, okay? So we want to make sure the mean is staying at 0. So what this is going to do now is, based on the scores, the outcomes, the data from the season, it's going to change our home edge. It's going to make our squared sum as small as possible. And by doing that, it's going to change our ratings. So we'll just click add here and say okay. And sometimes it adds the second one. I don't think you actually have to hit add. I think you just hit okay. So if you see this second one here, just highlight it and just click delete. And it takes a couple seconds, but it'll go away. The only other thing you're going to want to do is in options, make sure that assume non-negative is not checked. We don't want this to be checked, okay? So everything looks good here. And now all we're going to do is click solve. And the first time you do this, it's going to take a little while because it's got a lot of numbers to crunch. But now you can see it says solver found a solution. And you can see that these numbers have changed. So the home edge is now 0.2. So we thought it was 1. The home edge is actually only 0.2 goals. And we're just going to clean this up a bit. We're just going to round it. It's for calculation purposes, it's still going to calculate, but it's just easier to look at 0.21. Same with the squared. We're just going to bring that down a bit. And then same with our ratings. And we can close the solver. The solver's done its job. So now the ratings, it's actually got the proper ratings for the different teams now. So next, all we need to do, we can unhide those columns I hid before. We can set a rank. So again, I'm going to come over just because it's easier and copy it. But the rank is our power ranking. And it's just taking, if you see by the formula, it's taking the rating in B6, and it's going to look and compare it to everything else in this column and give it a number from 1 to 31. So if we click down, so we have it, and now we can sort this. So if we highlight this, we come to data, sort range, check data has header row, and choose by rank, A to Z or Z is fine, sort. And you can see now, based on this, Tampa Bay is our number 1 ranked team. And this is to this point in the season. So I run these every day and these change. So what you can do, and if we go back to, now we can go back to mine, we can see it matches. Just double check, it matches. So you can see I have previous and change. Well, what does this mean? Well, previous, so whenever I run the solver, so before I run the solver, I would just copy in the current rank, Command C, and then you always, because this is technically a formula, when you go into previous, you always want to paste values only, otherwise it'll paste the formula, and then you can compare where they're ranked now to their previous rank. So obviously there hasn't been a change since I ran this last, so you're seeing no change. And then change is just, literally we're just saying the previous minus the current for the change, positive or negative. And then I've added some conditional formatting. So to do that, you would just highlight this and go to Format, Conditional Formatting, and you can see I'm just using a color scale. So it'll default to single color. Just click on color scale. The range should be there already. And then I just choose this one. So from red to white to green, and then have the min red, the max green, and then you can mess around with your midpoint percentile. But this just gives like a nice color representation. So if we go over to NBA, for instance, you can see teams who have had the highest and the lowest change since you last ran the solver. So you can see for NBA, for instance, the Pistons, they've moved up 4 spots, whereas the Nets have moved down 4 spots. So it's just an easy visual representation. So that's really all you need to do. That's how you're going to do it. And then I run this every day. So the nice thing is, if we scroll down, because we've already copied in the scores, we're up to date. But say tomorrow, Tampa and all the games on the 27th have played. I'm recording this before these games have played. We can grab the scores. So remember this second tab, the year-to-date scores, will update. So we can grab those scores and just copy them in for the 27th, or you can manually add the scores. It doesn't really matter. But once you add these scores in, then you would just go up and you would click on add-ons and solver, start. And the nice thing, your equation should be saved. So it should auto save, so you won't have to re-enter the equation every time. And then you would just click solve, and then it would run an update based on that night's games, and you'll see some teams will actually change. And then from there, again, you can rank them. And then that's an easy way to get your power ratings and your power rankings based on the past scores. Okay, but it doesn't stop there. So if you've stuck around with me this long, I really appreciate it. Let's look at what this means. So we can now forecast potential games. So let's use the NFL for simplicity because there's only one game left, the Super Bowl. If we scroll down, based on all of this data, and the only thing I've done differently here, you can see, so the forecast is the exact same formula. The only small tweak I've made for this last game, because it's a Super Bowl, is I've taken out the home edge, which is actually really interesting. If you look at the NFL this year, the home edge on average has actually been negative 0.21 points, whereas everyone thinks it's usually 2.5 to 3 points. It's actually been a negative home edge this year, which is I found interesting, but that's based on the scores throughout the year. So the only thing I've done is taken out the home edge because they're playing on a neutral field. And given this, the forecast for this game, it actually has the Chiefs losing by 1.4 points, so by 1.5 points, which means the 49ers, it has favored to win by 1.4 points. So if you look, the spread right now is actually hovering around -1, -1.5 for the Chiefs. So in this case, it might actually make sense for you to bet on the 49ers, take the points or take the money line on the 49ers. And again, with spread sports, so like NBA, for instance, you can see it's projecting, in this case, the Rockets and the Nuggets, it's got the Nuggets winning by a point or less. It's got the Raptors winning by 2.2 points. So you can compare that to the spread for your spread games. But for sports like hockey and baseball, where it's not a spread sport, you can actually just project the winners here. And I'm just going to unhide something that I've had hidden. And this is for sticking around until the end. Here's some bonus tips. So we're going to look at the NHL because it's the one I have the most data on, and it's the one I have a full model for, so I can show you how I've integrated this. But essentially, all I've done is created a couple formulas here. So if we just look at all games played this year, you can see if we just bet blindly the home team to win, the home team have won 418 times this year, while the road team have won 348. Your win percentage would be 54.57, which if all games were -110, you'd be crushing it. You'd be having a great year. You'd be above break even. You'd be profitable. However, with hockey and baseball, that's not the case. Games are rarely -110 because it's a moneyline sport. So we need to actually look and figure out where our profit can be made by betting teams to win outright. So what we can do is we can look at our record if we bet the home team or bet the road team. So I've just set up 2 calculators really quickly, and I'll show you how to do this. Let's look at betting only the home team first. So let's just hide the road one, just for simplicity's sake. So if we only bet the home team, and let's just change this. What we would want to do to get our wins is we would want to just say And so we're going to use an if and that's essentially just setting up two parameters. So what we want to say is if N6, which is the forecast, is greater than the home threshold, which I'm setting this up as a home threshold so you can easily change it, of 0. So essentially this is saying if this forecast is greater than 0, because it's projecting, again, a home win. If it was negative, it would be projecting an away win. So if this forecast is greater than 0 and the outcome, so the home margin, is greater than 0. So if the home margin is greater than 0, that means the home team won. Then we're going to show a W. So this is just a way to see. So if the forecast was projected a home win and the home team won, we'll call it a W, else we'll call it nothing. We're not going to call it a loss because there are some cases where we wouldn't have necessarily made this bet. And then we're going to do the exact same for losses. So in this case, we're going to say if and. So if this time, if the home forecast, same thing, if the forecast was projecting a home win, but M6, so if the home margin was actually less than 0, so -1 for instance, or -2, 3, whatever, then the outcome of that game was actually a loss, okay? So we're just finding a way to count wins and count losses. And you can see, if we count here, that shows us that would be 325 wins and 208 losses if we use the home threshold of 0. But then you can play around with your threshold. So let's say that we want to check only forecasts above 0.2 goals. So we just change this to 0.2 and it would automatically update. And you can see our win percentage jumps up. So now we're at 260 wins and 153 losses. And so you just want to play around with this until you find something that makes sense. So like if we, for instance, if we did a home threshold of 1, our win percentage would be 80%, but we would have only bet 35 games all season. And this win percentage isn't everything. Let me talk about that quickly. So even though this win percentage is really high, if we scroll through and try and find games, and I'm just going to go to the last game that I have here because I happen to know it was pretty high. As you can see, if we are only betting these games with a forecast of 1 or higher for the home team, we're winning 80% of the time. But that's not the whole story, is it? Because we're not factoring in the odds. So what I mean by that is this last game, for instance, Minnesota and Detroit. And I'm using this one because I still have the odds available to me so we can easily look at them. So if we hop over to my comparative tracker, I have this here. So in this case, I have Detroit and Minnesota. And when I looked, the Vegas odds, it had Detroit at plus 232 and it had Minnesota at minus 267. The implied probabilities for that means that our break even there is 72.8%. So we would still be making money if our average odds were 267 because our win percentage is 80%. But let's say, we want to bet more than 35 times. So let's knock this down. Our win percentage is still 70%. But if our average odds are minus 267, we're actually losing money in the long run, right? So you need to play around with this and find a sweet spot. So let's say, I don't know, if our threshold minus 150, and this is if you don't have a model or anything, because I'll show you how I factor this into my model. And you can see that my probability, I actually had quite a lot higher. I had Minnesota at 84% rather than 72.8, which is a true probability of 70. But let's say our average odds are 150, okay? Then we know we only need a break even of 60%. So then we can actually set our threshold much lower and we can bet more games and still be profitable. So even if we go 0.3, which is what I have it set up, what the green is essentially just, it's conditional formatting and it's just quickly highlighting anything that's over 0.3. So you can see here, the win percentage year to date is 65.67. Even if we're betting anything with odds of minus 150 or better, we're still profitable because break even is 60%. So that's what you're going to want to do there, is just play around with it. And then of course you can look for opportunities for the road team, and it's going to be the same. It's just, if you look at the formulas, it's the opposite, and you can play around with that, but the concept is the same. It's just the opposite. And then your threshold is always going to be negative because the forecast is always based on the home team. But you can see, so if we set a threshold of 0.3 for home bets and negative 0.3 for road bets, we're doing doing pretty well. Our win percentage is 65, 67%. So if you didn't have a model, this is how you could easily play around and use this to find value in games, and you wouldn't need to do anything else, really, as long as you got to make sure and track your average odds, because if your average odds are lower, then this you're okay. But if your average odds are higher, then you're going to be losing money in the long run, because again, there's a lot of juice. These are heavy favorites you're betting, and the higher this threshold goes, the heavier the home favorite, the more juice. So minus 267 on the example, we're having to bet $267 to win 100 if Minnesota wins. And yeah, they win a good chunk of the time, but when they don't, we're losing a lot of money there. We're losing almost $300. So then for me, I just take this a step further, and I've incorporated this into my full NHL model. So you can see it automatically does a search and it pulls in the home advantage, and it just adds it to my expected goals for the home team. And that's how I'm using it. So similarly, if I have a road favorite, then it subtracts. And that's how I use it in my model, and it's successful. So you can see here, I saw some value in the wild at 86%. At the time, it was 84%. I thought it should actually have odds around minus 542, which never happens or rarely happens. But then I also have the puck line. So I ended up taking the puck line and having my members take the puck line on this one, because from my calculations, they hit the puck line around 70% of the time, and the odds said that we only needed them to hit 51% of the time. That's sort of another video. You can check out my model videos and stuff like that, but you can see that I am incorporating the edge into my model. But again, if you wanted to, you could literally just use the model and then play around with your threshold and then base it off of odds that you're going to need, because you know what the break even is for those odds. And that's really it. So again, this applies to different sports. With the spread sports, it's a little bit different because it's calculating a spread, so you would want to see if it's projecting a spread a little bit differently. So for instance here, the 49ers and Green Bay, it projected a spread of 8.5, and obviously San Fran won by 17, but that on its own doesn't really tell us anything, because if the spread was minus 7 for San Fran, then it would make sense to bet this. But if it was minus 10, then we probably wouldn't have bet this, even though it did come through for us. So those are just some different ways you can use power ratings. I know this video was long. Hopefully it was informative. I really appreciate you sticking around until the end. If you can give a comment below if this makes sense, if it's helpful for you, and also what you want to see in future videos, I would really appreciate it. And lastly, please like this video, give it a big thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification. Okay, I appreciate it. I'll see you on the next one.